Good morning, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Penzic University. This morning, I will be teaching you about how to dress as an early Anglo-Saxon woman. My name is Amy Sparrow, and I am a diverse arts laurel from the Kingdom of Atlantia. I've written this class with an emphasis on the beginner. I'm going to cover a lot of topics, and they're going to be covered in very narrow depth because every single slide of this presentation could be its own course for at least an hour. So you're going to get an overview, and then if you want to go deeper into your own research, there will be places to go in the bibliography at the end of this presentation. So with that, let's get started. This class is about the clothing worn by early English women, aka the Anglo-Saxons, between 450 and 700 AD on the island of Great Britain. This time period covers the centuries from the exit of the Roman occupation up until the conversion of the pagans to Christianity. After you take this class, you should have a good understanding about how to put together an early English woman's outfit. As you can see by the photo on the left, I will be peppering this entire presentation with images of people dressed in the Anglo-Saxon style. But first, let's talk about terminology. Scholars are moving away from the term Anglo-Saxon and replacing it with early English for several reasons. First, Anglo-Saxons never called themselves Anglo-Saxons. They referred to themselves in writing as the English, E-N-G-L-I-S-C. The term is culturally inaccurate as tribes other than the German Angles and Saxons were migrating to England at the time, such as the Jutes from Jutland, now part of Denmark, and the French. The final reason, possibly the most important one, is that the term Anglo-Saxon has been co-opted by the far right to promote the superiority of whiteness. And we don't want to have anything to do with that here. So we are turning our backs on the term Anglo-Saxon. Now you may wonder why I use the term Anglo-Saxon in the title of my class. That's because this whole discussion about what Anglo-Saxon should mean and does mean is not widely known yet. So if I were to title the class Early English Women, people wouldn't know who I was talking about. So I used the term Anglo-Saxon to bring everybody in. And now I'm going to try to remember to talk about the early English throughout the presentation. Topics that we're going to cover today are underdresses, peplos, brooches, rings, beads, wrist clasps, belts, belt pouches, hair, head coverings, and shoes. So, how do we know about early English clothing? The Dark Ages, which is now referred to as the early Middle Ages, were not well documented, but we have different sources available to us that we can use and extrapolate from. First, we have contemporary sources on the continent. We have grave finds, we have stone carvings, and we have mosaics. As an example, in the continental Germanic tribes at the time, from the 5th to 7th century, women and men had the right to take their belongings to the grave. If the same was true of the early English tribes, then we are not seeing gifts from mourners in the graves, but the things that belong to the people who are buried in the graves. That's an example of how we can extrapolate contemporary sources on the continent to England, because those tribes were moving from the continent to England at the time, and they probably brought their burial practices with them. On the left, you see an annular brooch. It has the remains of cloth on the back. This is how we primarily find out what cloth was available to people, because most of the cloth became disintegrated in graves, and what we have left is the cloth that we find adhered to the back of a metal pin. Dress fabrics. What dress fabrics were used? Dresses were made mostly from wool, some from linen. Twill appears to have been the weave most used. Very little fabric has been found in graves, and therefore, as reenactors, we have a lot of room to make choices about the fabrics that we use until more research is done or better testing techniques come along to give us a more definitive answer about what was used at the time. I want to mention that I listed a vendor here on this page. I'm not getting any money from any of the vendors that I list. I'm simply listing them for you, so you don't send me an email after class and say, hey, where do you buy your linen? So that's where I buy my linen, at this store. What colors were the dresses? Well, they got blue from woad, yellow from weld, red from madderwort and ladies' bed straw and madder. They got purple from lichens, and they got browns from tannin-based dyes. All of those things are still available to us today, with the possible exception of lichens no longer being available. The underdress. This is the garment that's worn underneath almost everything. And I'm not going to talk about any underlayers beyond the underdress, because I don't know of any evidence right now for any kind of underwear being worn, not any kind of underwear that we would acknowledge modernly as underwear. So let's just start with the basic dress. Probably made from linen, could have been made from lightweight wool. There's evidence for the long sleeves because of the sleeve fragments found attached to metal closures worn at the wrist. So if you have a burial and the inhabitant has wrist clasps and there's fabric under those wrist clasps, you know that she had some kind of garment on that had long sleeves. For the purposes of the SCA, an underdress can be a tea-tunic. I prefer my sleeves to be set in, so that's why you see set-in sleeves on this dress form. So now we're going to talk about Peplos, which is a lot of what the presentation is, different kinds of Peplos. What is a Peplos? A Peplos is one or two rectangles of fabric held together in place at the shoulders with brooches. Peplos were first seen in Roman and Greek garments. They became unfashionable for the Romans as the Romans were leaving Britain, but the Anglo-Saxons carried the tradition on. This is a very beginner-friendly fashion because the sewing is minimal, and you aren't required to have any fitting. It's just rectangles, and the length will vary according to what you want it to be. I wear my Peplos a little bit shorter because I don't like tripping over things. Ella has hers a little longer here. So now we're going to talk about 8 different styles of Peplos that are available to you. And I'm going to give you my pattern for each one of these so you can figure out how you get the look in the photo on the slide. The first Peplos with 2 brooches is 2 rectangles of fabric, as you see on the left. You sew them up the sides except for maybe 10 inches at the top. You leave the top open and the bottom open. And then you put a pin on each corner. You stick your arms through that opening at the top on each side. And what happens is, as you fit the garment to your shoulders, a natural cowl will form in the middle, as you can see on Ella here. See, this is very simple stuff. Something that's a little more complicated is this Peplos style that has the folded over bib in the front and the back. Again, you start with 2 rectangles of fabric. This time you sew them all the way up the sides and you leave the top and the bottom open. Then you fold down the garment at the top. So you've got a fold, as you see in the drawing. You put the pins a little closer to your neckline, and then you put your head through the middle and you put your arms to the 2 bits that are also open on top that are draped. Now this is going to require a bunch more fabric than the previous Peplos. But as you'll see in the next slide, you can get a second look out of this that's entirely different. This, by the way, my friends, was too warm to wear in the summertime. So if you're going to make this type of Peplos, I would recommend that you either forego the underdress or you make it out of handkerchief weight linen, because mid-weight linen, which is what this is, was too hot. Peplos Style 3 is the same exact construction as the previous style. You have 2 rectangles of fabric. You're going to sew the side seams closed all the way from top to bottom. Then you're going to put your pins on the inside of that wide seam. So you have a hole for your head in the middle, and then you have 2 holes for your arms on either side of those pins. And when you put that over your head, it's going to form a natural cowl. And then to get that look that you see in the photo, you're going to cinch the Peplos under your chest, and then you're going to cinch the Peplos again just above your hips. So the one usage note that I would have about this style is it looks better on people who are very tall. You don't get the same look if you're a little shorter and a little wider. So again, the style is for very tall, thin people. Let's continue on. The 4th type of Peplos, again, is 2 rectangles. They're not even sewn together. You're just going to fold the top down in the back and in the front, and then you're going to put pins on each shoulders. Again, that's the only thing that's holding these 2 pieces of fabric together. You're going to put that over your head. Your arms are going to poke out of the sides because they're not together. And then you're going to put a belt around it. And as you can see, this is a very, very simple style. I would like to mention the ring pouch that's hanging from Dessa's belt. From grave finds, it appears that Peplos opened on the left side, possibly for access to the bags and the contents of which have been found on the left side of grave remains in female graves. Female graves only. Peplos Style 5. This is our first Peplos that's a single piece of fabric. So you have your 1 piece of fabric, you fold it in half lengthwise. It remains open on the top and the bottom and the left side, and you just pin it to your shoulder, as Jeanette shows here. It's very simple. And I'd like to point out that she does have a string of beads that's attached to her shoulder in a loop. that is one of the options for jewelry for this time. The next style of the Peplos with one brooch is a very similar method, except for this time, instead of just pinning the corner, you're going to fold it down at the top. You might make that sort of bib in the front and the back, and then you're going to pin it at the shoulders. Again, so simple compared to lots of other clothing in the SCA. Notice that she has two brooches. The one in the center of her chest is not terribly functional. I believe it's just there to give her a way to add more bling to her outfit. This 7th style is the exact same style as style 5, except the piece of fabric that you're using is much shorter. So you're going to get a different look on the diagonal. The last style of Peplos I call the Frankenstein, because it is a combination of styles 1 with the 2 brooches and 7 with the single brooch. Notice the non-matching brooches on the shoulders of the drawing. This is historically accurate because not all burials were found with matching brooches. I'm not going to tell you a lot about sewing because a lot of it's very simple. And this isn't a sewing class. This is a class on how to recognize fashions and possibly use them. But we'll cover the very simplest stitches for this garment today. First, you get 2 pieces of fabric to sew together. This could be the front and the back of a Peplos. You're going to finish the edge by turning them back twice, and then you're going to whip stitch the edges down. Once you do that, you pin the 2 pieces of fabric together, and then you whip stitch them along the edge, and they are joined together. When you flatten that stitch out, this is the result that you get. It's nearly impossible to tell the front from the back, the inside from the out. And I came across this method when I went to a class on Viking clothing. And the teacher was showing us the garment that she had on, and she realized that she had it on inside out, and nobody could tell because the finish was so good. The inside was just as clean as the outside. So if you like doing hand sewing, and some people do, this is very meditative. And that's why I do this kind of hand sewing. So now we're going to talk about brooches. There are a ton of brooches and styles to choose from, depending on how specific you want to get with your outfit. I am not a metals expert by any stretch of the imagination, so I'm just going to show you some different types of brooches. The Ashmolean Museum has a ton of brooches to look at. Also, if you don't want to cast your own brooches, and probably not a majority of you want to cast your own brooches, you can buy some from vendors. There's a few vendors that do this. So you have the annular brooch, and then you have applied brooches with a metal with another metal applied to it. You have a button brooch, which is then stamped in the middle. And then you have a disc brooch and a saucer brooch. There are entire books and doctoral theses written about these kinds of brooches. Here is another completely different kind of brooch. Again, still early English. You've got a penannular brooch. You've got radiate head brooches. You've got square head brooches. You've got cruciform brooches. There's just an enormous amount to choose from. And you will have to do your own research to make sure that your brooch style matches the area that you're trying to recreate. Sleeve clasps were used to hold sleeves closed at the wrist. Remember, they're one of the things that we find fabric on the back side of to let us know that long sleeves were being worn. Hooks and eyes can be used. This giant hook and eye, it's a reproduction I bought from my friend Runa. It's based on object A in the picture on this slide. But you can buy some wrist clasps from Raymond's Quiet Press. I bought things from this particular vendor. Faux wrist clasps. So metal wrist clasps were brought over as a Scandinavian tradition. This changed over time, and people began to use embroidery on their wrists instead of the metal clasps. As you can see here, this is a drawing from Sutton Hoo, and on the far left, you see Elf with her embroidered wrists. Notice the garland of beads that she also has on. We're going to be talking about beads coming up. Embroidery. Oh my gosh, what a topic. The early English were known for their skilled embroidery, but we don't have hardly anything left of their work. We've got the Bayeux tapestry, we've got Mammon embroideries, we've got Queen Arnegun's cuffs and Queen Bathilde's shirt. These examples tell us that the following stitches can be used: Bayeux tapestry stitch, laden couch work, stem stitch, outline, chain, and split stitch. The embroidery designs were probably very similar to designs on illuminated manuscript pages and in architecture, such as acanthus leaves, architectural elements, and animals as repeated motifs. My friend Khalib here has gorgeous, gorgeous embroidery on her cuffs and her collar. Do we know for sure that the embroidery was that big? No, we don't, but she did a lot of research and has extrapolated from the research that she did in order to find the motifs for her embroidery. I recommend that you go and read Embroidery of an Anglo-Saxon Tunic by Khalib, modernly Patty Ellison. It's listed in the bibliography. Belts. Belts were either leather or textiles. And when I say textiles, I mean woven wool, linen, or hemp. Modernly, people use ankle woven belts, which are not historically accurate, but certainly acceptable in the SCA. Men, women, and children wore belts. And at the right, you can see a reproduction textile belt with a buckle. I do want to say about ankle weaving, even though it's great to wear and answers the 10-foot rule that we have about you look good from 10 feet away. Yeah. I advise against putting an ankle woven belt into an arts and sciences competition and claiming that it's Anglo-Saxon. The judges will know that's wrong. So I'm just telling you, if you're going to do competition with an Anglo-Saxon outfit, make sure that you do tablet weaving, not ankle weaving. Ring pouches are the entire reason that I went down the Anglo-Saxon early English rabbit hole. I took a class 5 or 6 years ago from Patty about how to make these bags. I made one, and then I wanted to know what went in them. That's a whole nother class. Right now, we're just talking about the ring pouch. It was made from fabric or leather, and it hung from the waist. As I said, archaeologists believe that it was hung on the left side because that's where the contents of the bags have been found in graves. Rings were made from ivory, iron, antler, or wood. And for the most part, all of that has disintegrated in graves. There's some debate about whether the rings were covered with bag fabric or left viewable as seen in the middle bag on the next page. The jury's still out as far as I'm concerned. Here's some sample ring pouches. Oh, and there's the link to Khalib's class on how to make ring pouches. It's a really great beginner project that can be done by kids even. Beads. The Anglo-Saxons not only wore beads of their own manufacture, they wore Roman beads too, if they could find them. The topic of beads is so huge. I cannot even begin to cover what that would entail in this class. That's a whole nother class. If you like to make beads, you can certainly make your own Anglo-Saxon beads. I buy mine from Heart of Oak Crafts on Etsy. Although I will say I have made my own beads. I just don't like being that close to fire. Necklaces / strings of beads. Again, like the brooches, there was so much variety. And I've tried to put together some examples so you can see what your options are. Now, amber was the most common bead found in early English graves. The tribes thought that amber had curative powers. So that's why you see a lot of yellow when people are reproducing strings of beads. I use glass instead of amber because frankly, amber is just really expensive. So as you can see here on the left, there's a plain circle of beads, and that's just regular old necklace. And then you have a simple necklace here in the middle, just a few beads in a shell. And then you have a string of beads suspended from a brooch. Again, another valid way to wear beads. Here are some more bead configurations. I have a book that has, I don't know, I want to say 15 or 20 different ways that you can wear your beads. These are just some that I put together this morning with my supplies. Knot rings were found in 6th and 7th century women's graves. Knot rings were made to confuse the evil eye because the person giving the evil eye got lost in the swirls of the knots. Gold rings were used to cure eye problems. There's lots of early English spells that talk about gold rings. Iron rings were used against evil spirits, of course. And bracelets could be simple bent wire. As you can see by the image on the right, these were made by my friend Runa for me for this Anglo-Saxon project. Coins and chatelaines. Here's something you might not know. The Anglo-Saxons did not use coins for money. They wore them as jewelry. They either pierced the coin and made a hole so they could have it on a string, or they added a loop to the coin, as you can see in this picture here. Another way to wear beads, coins, and shells was on a chatelaine suspended from the waist. I made this chatelaine for a friend of mine, and in period, they would have been strung on leather or wool thread. Mine is on waxed linen. A spindle whorl is something else that you could wear on your belt to look like you are walking around in period. These larger beads were mostly made by Romans, and they could have been used as toggles or spindle whorls. And these also were used in magic. I've added one of the magic spells that I found in Anglo-Saxon Amulets and Curing Stones. Great book if you want to really deep dive into what was found. So let's talk about hair. In addition to the sexy rectangles that make up Anglo-Saxon Peplos, the hair, the simplicity of the hair options is really a benefit to the beginner. Hair could be drawn back in a ponytail, just like you would wear it for your everyday purposes. You could just put a simple headband on, or you could part it down the middle and wear it loose. Then you can get into braids if you like braids. My friend Corinne is a professional hairstylist, and she did all of these braids. And it's a great way to keep the hair out of your face during the summertime. Roman hairstyles may have continued into the New World, and simple braids were also an option. There's lots of images of Germanic slaves in our secondary evidence. And those slaves were shown with their hair worn down or tied in a knot at the back of their neck. Migration period veils. I have a long quote here about veils, which basically says they can be colored, they can be white, they can be smooth, they can be pleated. You can wear them with a headband, you can wear them without a headband, you can wear them with a coif. I kind of have a coif on right now without a veil on top of it. Head coverings are a great way to personalize your look, and the options are endless. Head coverings based on Viking finds. That's what I've got on my head right now, is this little cap on the far left with a little point on the top, which is kind of floppy right now, probably because the point is too big. Each one of these items can be worn separately, or you can wear all of them together. But if you don't like veils, this is a really good option. Outerwear. The outerwear options are also quite varied. You can go for wool, as Esperanza is wearing on the right and center, or you can go for something that's woven, such as Issa's wool cloak from the Etsy shop Historical Textile. Chances are, if it's summertime, you're not going to need these extra layers of wool. Shoes. No shoes have been found in late 6th and early 7th century graves. Iron Age shoes can provide a model for us, and these shoes are made from single piece of leather or hide, pierced on the edges, and then you pull your laces through the piercings. I buy my shoes at Medieval Moccasins. In fact, this exact pair, those aren't my feet, but I have this exact pair from that vendor. A fragmentary leather shoe was found at Sutton Hoo. Here are more options for shoes. As you can see, a lot of them could pass for much later in time than just the early Middle Ages. So with that, I just want to reiterate, for those of you who are beginners in the world of historically accurate clothing, early English garments are a good place to start. Dresses and peplos are made from rectangles with very little shaping. Textile belts are appropriate. Simple ring pouches are easy to construct. A single glass bead is enough for a necklace, and uncovered hair is historically accurate. Here's my bibliography. If you want to peruse this at your leisure, There's a lot of good reading in there. And I want to personally thank everybody that helped me with the class, gave me feedback, advice, and permission to use their photos. These are my models. If you have questions, you can contact me at amysparrowatlantia@gmail.com. If you like classes on historical clothing, you can check out my YouTube channel, Quilts and Costumes. Thank you for viewing the class. I hope you enjoy the rest of your pension. Ciao.